Well, the people of Colorado have done a pretty good job in maintaining some of these old landmarks, places that remind us of the days when the West was lusty and young, and covered wagons were rolling into Colorado. A lot of them with signs painted on them, Pikes Peak or Bust. And of course, later some of them came back. The signs were crossed out and they had below them, Busted Bagash. Along that trail of desperation that led back homeward, there were buried many of the occupants of those wagon trains, and there were also buried a lot of hopes. Hopes of fortunes that they hoped to dig out of the Colorado mountains. Fabulous country, this. All around these camps, Cripple Creek, Central City, and right here in Leadville. Well, we'll take a character like this over here, for instance. H.A.W. Tabor. Haw Tabor, they called him. One of the most fabulous characters that ever came into this country. But I think he was probably the greatest example you'll ever find of how quickly fortunes were made and fortunes lost. Now, he was one of those lucky ones. He kept a grocery store, and of course he was the postmaster. Up in one corner of the store was his little post office, and he would grub-stake these prospectors going out. You know, a grub-stake consisted of giving the man all the rations, all the food he needed, and the money to buy the little bits of equipment they had to have to get in and dig out hunting for this gold. A number of these fellows, of course, failed. They went back home, disappeared, went to other camps. But the fellows who clicked, the men who really found the gold, silver, whatever they were looking for, were the men who came back, and the man who grub-staked them had an equal share in all their holdings. And that is how Tabor's fortune began. It then piled up. Silver became king. Silver was the sovereign. It ruled everything, and it made of Tabor a king, too. The Silver King. And of course he did what everybody else did in those days, moved up to Denver, built himself a terrific mansion, marble staircases, and lived as a man like that should. Well, the money rolled in so fast to those fellows that they didn't know what to do with it. They spent it lavishly. They built, they gave away. Tabor, for instance, in some of the things he did, he built an opera house in Denver. When he had his opening, he even had the president out there for it. He had been able, through his great wealth, to have himself sent to the United States Senate. So he was Senator Tabor. The president was there for the opening of the opera house. But a couple of days before the opening, Tabor came in, puffing on a great cigar, and he looked at a scenic artist who was up there painting a portrait on the proscenium arch. He said, "Whose picture is that you're painting up there?" The artist said, it's Shakespeare. Run it out. Put my picture up there. What did he ever do for Colorado? And that was the beginning. Tabor, of course, when he found Baby Doe, now that could be an artist's romantic conception of what Baby Doe might have looked like when Tabor first met her. He divorced his wife, met Baby Doe, married Baby Doe, and their first child, to give you an idea of that fabulous age, was named Rosemary Silver Dollar Echo Honeymoon Tabor. Well, he ended up, the cycle was complete, just as he started. When the great crash in silver came, he was wiped out completely. He became destitute, and finally some friends arranged to have him appointed postmaster of Denver. He never lived to receive his appointment, or to function at any rate. He died then, having been appointed postmaster. As I say, the cycle was complete, because he said when they mentioned the fact to him that they might be able to give him a job that would make him a living, they could have him appointed postmaster. And the poor old man said, "Well, you know, I could do that. I used to be a postmaster once." Well, I've heard it said that the noise in history is made by the rustle of silk shoes going up the marble staircases, or coming down it rather, and the clatter of the wooden sabots or the wooden shoes going up. With Tabor, it was quite reversed also. It wasn't the wooden shoes going up and the silk shoes coming down. It was that elegant squeak of patent leathers going up the marble staircase in Denver and the slow, despairing, despondent shuffle of broken, run-down shoes fumbling their way to oblivion. Well, there were many just like him. For instance, that picture over there. Margaret Brown, the unsinkable Mrs. Brown. Well, you may wonder what an oar would be doing in Leadville. But that oar is a souvenir from the Titanic. You know, this Margaret Brown was another fabulous character. Like Tabor, but a little bit different. Margaret Brown, her mother, of course, did laundry work for the miners in Leadville, Cripple Creek. But Margaret was a fine, lusty gal, and she was going to go places. So she picked out for her husband a little fellow who was honest, who was a nice little fellow, kindly, little Johnny Brown. So she married him. And they settled down, and of course, as soon as they moved into their cabin, Johnny went out, made a great strike. As soon as he came to town, he was offered $300,000 cash for his mine. He said, "They'll take it." So he came home to Maggie with $300,000 in bills, and he just peeled off enough of it so that he could have a good time with his friends uptown, and he gave the rest into Maggie's hand. He said, "Maggie, I told you I'd make you a fortune one day. Here it is. You take care of it. I'm going to have a good time." So we went uptown, met a lot of his pals. They moved around, had a great time together. Well, about 4 o'clock in the morning, they all came reeling home. Johnny said, "I think we ought to have a little coffee." So we built up a fire in the little kitchen stove out there in the second room of the log cabin. Just about the time the coffee pot started to boil, there was a scream from the bedroom, and Margaret came rushing out of there, ran to the stove, and then fell over in a faint. She had hidden the $300,000 in the kitchen stove, and Johnny had burned it up. Well, of course, she went into hysterics, and he said, "Mother, don't worry about that. I'll go out tomorrow and make another strike." And blessed if he didn't. He went out the very next day, struck another big vein of gold and silver, and when they tried to buy that from him, he said, "I don't believe in chimneys. I have no faith in them. Leave the money in the ground. I know it's safe there." Well, in the years that followed, he took out about $20 million out of that ground. And as far as Margaret was concerned, she wanted to go social. Well, he said, "Go ahead." They moved to Denver, built themselves another one of those marble palaces. Then she wanted to go to Europe to sing. Well, he said, "Go ahead, Maggie, if you want to. But just remember this, spend whatever you want. There'll always be plenty in the bank for you." So Mrs. Brown hightailed it over to Europe, studied with all the masters over there, went around to the different capitals, learned several languages, was very social, always wanted to climb socially. And of course she would be in the right place at the right time. She had been on one ship that had been wrecked. She had survived that, but she would pick out that particular maiden voyage of the Titanic. And that particular night, on the Titanic, cold winter night, she wanted to take a turn about the deck. Well, she was a gal from the mining camps of Colorado. She was used to cold weather. She knew what to do. When she came on deck, she had long woolen underwear, 3 or 4 heavy flannel petticoats, a wool dress, and a mink coat that came clear to her heels and a fur cap. And when the Titanic hit that iceberg, and pandemonium broke loose, Mrs. Brown got into one of those lifeboats. One woman with a tiny baby with hardly enough clothes to cover her was in there. Mrs. Brown peeled off the fur coat, said, "Here you are, darling, take this. That'll keep you warm. I'm a healthy woman." And she was, healthy and lusty. She began taking these petticoats off, wrapping up children, and then she took command of the boat. "Now," she said, "pull. I've been shipwrecked before, and you men take those oars and pull. I know what happens when the ship goes down. Now pull, pull, pull." And she started to sing. "I'll give you a song that you can roll to. People in Europe Why, they pay to hear me sing, and you get it for nothing. And one fellow said, but I can't row, you see, I've got a bad heart. She said, you got a what? I don't care if you got a bad heart. You'll pull on that oar or you'll have a bad head. I'll bash your brains out. Now pull, you terriers, pull. And it was Mrs. Brown who got her ship, saved her boat safely away from that ship, saved everyone on it, and when she came back down into New York with the rescue ships, one of the reporters said to her, but Mrs. Brown, weren't you afraid of drowning? She said, afraid of drowning? Of course not. I can't drown. I'm unsinkable. Well, that was the spirit of Leadville. Leadville, raucous, rowdy, rough and tumble, fabulous Leadville. When gold gave out, they discovered silver. When silver went on the wane, it was zinc, then tungsten. And like some of the other towns in Colorado that became ghost towns, Leadville refused to become a ghost town. Leadville refused to die. Well, until our next visit, as the old Sioux Indians would say, war stay.
Join us for another authentic story of the West when we again meet America's favorite Western storyteller, Tim McCoy.